everyone, and welcome to be my guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lir Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And as many of you now probably know, and a great many of you don't know, I did my doctorate on literature about childhood under Nazism. And it's a very long story why I got into it and how I got into it and found out about my own, ethnic background. But along the way, I became very friendly with a lot of Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors. And I now count them as friends. And none more so than my next guest, Dr. Inge Auerbacher from New York. Hi, Inge.
Hello, Mary, and hello, Ireland. I'm happy to speak to you.
Ireland is happy to speak to you too, Inge.
Thank you, thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Everything is great.
Is COVID sorting itself out with you, or are you?
Well, no. I mean, we had 6 people in my area who died, so I'm just not going out very much. I follow the rules, whatever, and that's it. And I have food in the house. I have a good, good bed. I have a roof over my head. So that's all I need. That's it.
Have you good neighbors, Inge?
And we're extremely good neighbors. Yes, they're my family.
Yeah, it's so important. But Inge, yes, you're a chemist. You're a retired chemist.
Yes, I worked for 38 years in medical research and clinical work. In one job, I stayed 30 years.
30 years?
In one job, yes.
Wow, they nearly had to wheel you out. But that's what we say here in Ireland when somebody, somebody stays.
Well, it was time to leave, and that I could do the things that were on my mind still, to speak all over the world, to write more books, which is my hobby. And I'm working right now on my 7th book. I'm having a little trouble. It's a little more difficult. It's for very young children, and I've never done something like this before.
It's a different process when you're talking, when you're trying to reach a very young audience with...
and it's not about the Holocaust either. It's a different topic. I write about different topics.
Yeah, because you've written about science, and you've written about...
Not one book only about science.
Yes, but you have written on science, and you've written on...
Yes, I have written one. It was a personal story. A drug, a streptomycin, which was one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And the Nobel was given for it, but not to the student who really did most of the work.
Is that the student who really did most of the work? Dr.
Yes,
Schatz,
but here I was in the hospital that
Dr. Schatz.
Right, yes, but I didn't know him in those days, and the drug was not discovered yet by that time when I was in the hospital.
But she was the person really behind.
Yeah, well, behind you, you see me in the hospital.
Yeah.
2 years in the hospital, yes, with TB.
So, Inge, take me back to World War II and prior to it, to I suppose the moment it started for you, that you started to comprehend what was going on around you.
Well, I mean, I'm born December 31, 1934, in a little village in southwestern Germany called Kippenheim. I'm the last Jewish child born in that village. It was about 2,000 people, 60 Jewish families. And Hitler had just come into power.
Yeah.
In fact, I was born in the house that my father was probably born in. We lived in that village way over 200 years. And the doctor who delivered me actually already belonged to the Nazi party, but he still took very good care of his Jewish patients, which is, sort of quite different. He came to my mother's bedside. She was very sick for 9 months, wearing a Nazi uniform sometimes. Later on, he did some horrible things, most likely euthanasia, killing people with mental, physical difficulties. And he was in jail for many years. I never saw him again. But I cannot say anything bad about him. He took very good care
of you,
of my mother, and
mother.
he delivered. He gave me life.
Well, he helped give you life. He did.
Right.
He did. You know, it's interesting. I spoke with Dr. Helen Ganner, who wrote her memoir, 4 Letters to the Witness of My Childhood. And the 4 letters were to the 5 significant people in her life. And 2 of them were her sister Yanka, her mother, her father, there was a Nazi had actually come into the room that she was hiding behind a curtain, and he saw her, and he turned to the soldiers with him, and he said, "Keine Juden here. There are no Jews here." And he walked out, and they all walked out. And he had seen her, but he had, as he saw her, he looked over onto the bedside locker, and there was a photograph of her with her mother on the bedside locker, and he just looked at her and just told the soldiers there were no Jews
See,
there.
that's the dichotomy of this whole story.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't have to take care of me, but he did to my mother. But anyway, it really started on November 9th and 10th, Crystal Night, the night of broken heart.
Yeah.
I was not even 4 years old.
Yeah.
Now, my father was a disabled war veteran from World War I. He had the Iron Cross. We were very proud Germans, as you probably have read about. German Jews were very integrated. I came from a religious family, not ultra-Orthodox, but conservative. We kept our holidays, everything. And I remember Crystal Night very well. Now, for instance, getting back to being Jewish in Germany, there never were more than 500,000 Jews living in Germany. People think there were millions whenever I speak. I said, how many do you think? No, 500,000, that's it. And my great-grandmother, for instance, my mother's grandmother, had 14 children. She had 4 sons in World War I, and 2 died for Germany. And she was killed by the Nazis, shot in a mass grave in Riga. I remember Crystal Night quite well, although I was not even 4 years old. And Grandpa and Grandma had visited us at that time. They lived about 200 kilometers away. And Grandpa went into the synagogue in the morning. He was quite religious, you know, and said his morning prayers there. And he was arrested with all the Jewish men living in Kippenheim from the age of 16 on, and sent to Dachau. Now, my father didn't go early this morning, and the police came to our house and arrested my father, even though he was a decorated war veteran.
It's amazing how many Jewish decorated war veterans were actually.
Many, and highly decorated.
Highly decorated, and when they even said, look, I was decorated, it didn't
matter. Even that he had the Iron Cross, which is in America like the Purple Heart. And they took him to Dachau. In that area, the camp was Dachau. In some other areas, it was Buchenwald. So all the boys, in other words, 16-year-olds, teenager, who were Jewish, and the men were sent to Dachau in our region. Kippenheim is at the border of France and Switzerland. The Rhine is the natural barrier from France. So we're very close to France. And all the houses, the Jewish houses, were, desecrated. In other words, they were throwing in stones to break all the windows. The synagogue was diagonal from us, and they started to burn it, but there were Christian houses nearby. And they stopped that because then a Christian house would go up in flame too, because it was November 9th and 10th where all the synagogues in Germany and in Austria were either burned down or desecrated very badly. By us, it happened on November 10th. But then the rumpus started, and we were standing in our living room, and all these stones are coming in, and my grandmother was standing with me, my mother, and my mother just pulled me away. Otherwise, that brick that they threw in would have hit my head and I wouldn't be here. And then we were hiding in the backyard shed
That was
the
you
whole
at
day.
that was you at that time.
How old I was?
That was is you around that time.
Well, the picture next to you, well, you have the picture of with my
I have the black
right
and white photograph, and then
yes, there is a photograph right there. That's about the age I was.
Yeah.
Behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was not even 4 years old. And also there's another picture below you. That's around that time.
That one
so
there.
No men and boys were in the village, and we were hiding in the backyard shed. They had a very large house, at least 18 rooms, and they had a big door. They were knocking on that. They wanted to come in, but somehow all this alarm, whatever, this terrible thing stopped very late at night, and we went to our neighbors, Jewish neighbors, where the windows were all broken, and we stayed there. Now, the synagogue was desecrated very badly on that day, and they tore the Torah rolls. We have the Old
Torah.
Testament. They ripped on parchment, which is our holiest means, because we read from it every day, actually, and read a portion. And it is like a human being. We treat the Torah, which as like a human being.
Well,
and they tore that apart.
It's amazing, Inge, when I was teaching in Mary Immaculate, it was interesting what I found out, that they actually made shoes. They made soles for the shoes.
I saw
out of the Torah.
That's right. And drums.
Yes, because they were walking on it, literally walking on it.
I have friends who had some of those. I did see the soles, and I saw a drum. No, that was made from skin.
They made
it also from skin of human beings.
They did, yeah.
But they also used Torah rolls. It's parchment, and we had quite a few of them, not only one. And it was, my parents never wanted to leave Germany. My father was a real German, and we spoke German at home, and we had a very nice Jewish community there, a little bit isolated. Most of the people, the Jewish people, sort of stayed with each other. I mean, we had great relationships with the Christian neighbors. We lived side by side. I mean, it didn't matter. They fought in the war together, etc. But we had our own community, a very tight-knit community for hundreds of years.
You're thinking the fact that you were such a tight-knit community as a whole, in general, Jewish people tend to help each other out, and I know that when I was talking to another friend of mine, Toba Abramchik, her father went to Israel after the war, and then he was sponsored to come to Canada, and then he was sponsored to go to Toronto. That people tended to help each other out, that they had been in the camps with. They became family. When their own families had died, they found a family amongst the survivors.
Their families. It is a custom. If somebody comes, let's say mainly a Jewish person, comes into a little village or wherever, a stranger, you invite them, especially for a Friday night dinner, for the Sabbath. And I mean, I was brought up religiously, so I learned all that. But anyway, I want to tell you what happened. We did not know where they were sent to. No idea. I mean, my father said, why do we have to leave Germany? This crazy guy, Hitler, he will go away. And I'm a proud German. I have the Iron Cross. They're not going to touch us. We never thought that. But when they were sent to Dachau, conditions were very bad. In fact, I went to see Dachau. He was in barrack number 16. Now all those barracks are down. They were filled up with lice and so for vermin. They burned them down after the war. But you have markers where all the, the barracks were. So I saw barrack number 16, the marker. I visited it, put some stones in. We do that in memory
instead of flowers.
Terrible things. But anyway, they were there a few weeks. And somehow my mother bought some bogus papers to some South American country, which wasn't a real one, and she showed it to the Nazi command there in the neighboring town, and they accepted and they permitted my father to leave Dachau. My grandfather came a little later, but when he came home, they told the terrible stories. They had to give up all their clothing, wear the blue and white striped uniforms, stand at attention for hours. They had this parade ground.
Can you explain to people who don't know, Inge, the difference between the camps then? Because you had the work camps, you had the transit camps, like.
Well, let's say they were all
and then the
terrible, and they were all death camps because people died there. Some, of course. You have the actual death camps where you have gas chambers. I mean, Dachau eventually, I believe, I don't remember if they had, at that time they didn't have gas chambers, that's for sure. No. I want to talk to you what happened at that time. Later on, things changed, of course.
Yeah.
But this was at the very beginning. It was the first concentration camp in Germany, Dachau.
Mm.
It was used for political prisoners in the beginning, and then they put the Jews in 1938. And they had to stand at attention, the bitter cold, no underwear, just these blue and white striped pajamas, prison uniform. And if somebody wanted to blow the nose, they hosed them down with ice cold water. And that happened to my father a few times. And they said, oh, you could throw away your iron cross. You're a dirty Jew. You're nothing to us. Well, my father, I guess, wasn't used to that. You know, he fought for the country, was wounded, or on his right shoulder. He would never be able to raise his right arm again. And so after a few weeks, most of them were allowed to come home. Of course, some people died there too. And my father said, we must leave this country. But where to? Where to? The doors to the free world were closing very rapidly, and you needed a visa. And so we figured, actually, my father had an uncle in America, in New York, who became quite wealthy. And my mother called him up. He had a ceramics business, quite famous on Fifth Avenue, a big street in New York, famous, very elegant street. And he said to my mother, what do you want to come here for? You know, we have a depression, we have unemployment. You will just add to that. Can you imagine? We're desperate to leave. So we sold our house at a very cheap price. But, we were happy to get out. Even when I speak to the... Yes, even when I speak to the to the people they still have it, the grandchildren of these people. Look, maybe we could have gotten more for the house, whatever. It doesn't matter how much they paid. I don't care. We wanted to leave in a hurry, and whoever bought it, fine, let's get out. So we settled in with my grandparents, my mother's parents, who lived in also a very tiny village, about 1,000 people. At one time, that village was 40% Jewish. That's very
your grandparents there with your parents.
Yeah, so we stayed there hoping to get a visa to leave. And there was one chance. We got some kind of connection, actually from the Jewish community. They said, oh, maybe this guy can help you. It turned out to be a swindler, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And he was caught with our passports in, I believe it was Belgium. And that was the end of it. So they came to the house, looking for my father, and he took a bicycle and went away that day and just ran away. But anyway, we stayed there. And I will say, in that village, of my grandparents were the last Jewish family living in that village. It's called Jebenhausen, near Göppingen. In fact, Albert Einstein had great-grandparents who lived there as well. And they were bakers, had a small bakery there. And I always wanted to meet Albert because
Einstein.
I became a scientist. And not only that, my family came from the same village, which, as I said, was 40% Jewish at one time. But they left around 1850 into the bigger cities or to America and did very well, except my grandparents stayed in the village. My grandfather was a cattle dealer because in those days, Jewish people, especially in the little villages, I mean, they weren't allowed to enter the unions and things. So they had little stores, cattle dealing. So my grandfather had a cattle dealer, small time, and the cattle were in the house. The stable was in the house.
They used to have that here in Ireland as well.
You had it the same way, yeah.
Because the cattle used to come in. Cattle was your livelihood. And
absolutely.
It was more important than the house almost, because without the cattle you
right. I mean, and I will, but of course we had another area to go into the house, to go upstairs. But those 2 years about that I was in Jebenhausen, it was my childhood.
Have you been back there, Inge? I'm no doubt you've been back to Kippenheim.
How long have I been?
Have you been back to Kippenheim?
Oh yeah, I've been back. And by the way, there in Jebenhausen, I would like to say that's very important. The people, most of them were extremely nice to us. I had wonderful girlfriends there and boys who played with me. In fact, the last two just died. It was lifetime friendships, and they didn't have to play with a Jewish girl, but they did. And some of the people would give us food because you had ration cards, so forth.
Is that your neighbors down here?
Yeah. And yes, you asked me, have I been back to?
Yeah.
Yes, I have been back to my hometown and to the other village where my mother came from. Yes, in fact, there was just now an article in the Stuttgart paper, a very big newspaper. The head of that's the main city in the state of Württemberg, but now Baden and Württemberg are together. I was born in the state of Baden, my mother Württemberg, and they're very powerful states together. They don't like each other, but they have to be together.
Isn't it such a magnificent country? I mean, I've been to Germany. I saw 11 cities. We toured 11 cities in West Germany and then 11 cities in East Germany before the wall came down as a dancer. And I was just struck by the order of the country, the cleanliness of it, the beauty of it. And it was only later when I became immersed in my research and that I thought to myself, how could such awful, horrible, horrendous evil come from such a beautiful country?
Absolutely. And these were intelligent people. May I tell you a little bit more what happened afterwards?
Yeah.
I'd like to continue if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, by that time, I just celebrated my 5th birthday at that time. And then I'm 6 years old. And we're still living in the little village. And it was time to go to school, but Jewish children were not allowed to go to the regular school. Yeah. There was only one Jewish school for the whole state in Stuttgart. I had to get travel papers to go there. And in the beginning, my father took me with a bicycle first to the train station. We weren't allowed to use a bus. And then the train for close to an hour. Today takes maybe a half an hour to go to the Jewish school. All the children from the state of Württemberg had to go to the school in Stuttgart. And from all the transports which went from there, from the state of Württemberg, I'm the only child from the whole state who was sent away to the camps. There were quite a few camps, and I'm the only child who returned. Well, then the problem started. And the first transports started in that area in 1941. In my hometown, the transport started already in 1940, and they were transported to the Spanish-French border to a camp called Gurs. But because we were not there anymore, so we were not involved in that, but some months later we were involved. So all the Jews in the state of Baden, the state was Judenfrei, free of Jews, the whole state where I was born. But now I'm in Württemberg. The Stuttgart is the capital. But anyway, the transport started there too in 1941 in December, and we had our number to go. And somehow my father wrote a letter to the Gestapo. My grandfather died, by the way, in the meantime. And my grandmother was in the transport, and somehow we got out. But we found out later, very lucky to get out because my father was a disabled war veteran.
Very lucky.
And that was very lucky because almost all those people, they were sent to Riga in Latvia. Most of them were sent to the forest, and one of them was called the Birkenike Forest. And I went there to say goodbye to my grandmother. I mean, I knew one lady who was in the same transport, and she told us. And my grandmother said she was 59 at that time. She could not made it, and she was sent to the forest. And I saw the monuments and the memorial in that place, in the Birkenike Forest near Riga. I went to see a lot of the camps, but this, and back in mine too, where I was, that comes a little later in the story. And it was something so painful. Over 50,000 people were in that forest alone. You have one mass grave after another with cement around it, no names, of course. For all intents and purposes, should have been in one of those graves, and that's where all the kids from my school were sent, and they are there.
Very, very, for people who don't know, the very, very young, like you,
yes,
and the very old, or what wouldn't be very old now, but anyone who wasn't of use was just
right. But I want to add something because it has to be said. Eventually, my parents had to do some slave labor, and I went all by myself by train to Stuttgart, 6 years old, wearing the yellow star. And I believe I sent you a picture of my star.
It's up there at the top.
It still has threads on it because we ripped it off on May 8th, 1945, when we were liberated. But my father said to me, I went all by myself. When I think about it, 6 years old to be on a train, impossible, and wearing the star. So he said to me, sit in such a way that you can lean against the left window, to cover your star, because there were always some rowdy kids, you dirty Jew, and so forth. I was as clean as they, believe me, maybe even cleaner. And one day there was a lady, she didn't wear a star, obviously not Jewish. She walked by, she saw me with a little bag of rolls, probably her lunch, put it next to my seat and walked away. I never forgot that good lady, the righteous Christian. I have two of them in my life, which I will tell you soon. And probably she's in heaven looking down. That little Jewish girl never forgot me. I never knew her name, but she will be in my memory as long as I live. Then when my grandmother was in the transport, they took away the house, kicked us out, just took it like that, no compensation, nothing. And we were sent to Jewish houses in the neighboring village, actually a bigger town. My grandpa had lived in the village, which today is incorporated in the bigger town of Göppingen. And there were just Jewish people in that house. It was kind of a seedy neighborhood. There were a few houses like that. And one day, and school closed. I never finished my first grade. I had 6 months of schooling. That was it. Never finished my first grade, my second, third, 8 years of schooling I missed in my life.
God, how you made up for it, though.
Well, I had to. I didn't want to be a dummy all my life.
Another friend of mine, Tommy Reichenthal, he's one of the only Jewish survivors of the Holocaust here in Ireland. He regrets, that's one of his regrets, is that he missed so much of school while he was in Bergen-Belsen. He was 11 when he was released. And he said,
I was even younger.
He became an engineer later on. He moved to Israel, came to Ireland. But he said, if only I hadn't missed that 11 years, what could I have been now instead of being an honorary doctorate? He said,
you have to catch up. You know, you cannot think back if, when, how. Yeah. You have to think today, you know, what did they say? Yesterday is mystery. Tomorrow is, yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery. And you can't go back, you know, you have to look forward. I'm an optimistic person. Yeah, but anyway, the transports to the east, we didn't know where they went, started at that time to Riga and so forth. And in a few months later, after my grandmother was gone, in August, our turn came, and they didn't say where the transport was going to. And I was the youngest in a transport of close to 1,200 people. I was 7 years old. And this is how a transport was put together. We had to assemble in a school gymnasium in the bigger town. And we were allowed to take some things. I mean, they told you in the directive what you should take, a blanket, metal dishes. And we were even allowed to take some more things. Of course, they took it when we arrived. And one thing I had was my doll. My doll was a gift from my grandmother.
I'm about to try and get to. I'll show a photograph later on when I'm putting it together of your doll.
I named her Marlene after Marlene Dietrich, the famous movie star, world movie star, who eventually came to America too. She wasn't Jewish.
She was German.
She was German, a real sex symbol, very ultra famous movie star.
Yeah.
And my doll had blue eyes and blonde hair, so did she. So when I was 2 years old, when I got the doll, you know, I talked to my mother, I mean, maybe a little older, you know, who's that lady? She loved movie stars. She had this album. I said, who's that lady? It's my mother. That's Marlene Dietrich. So I said, fine, I'm going to name her after her. But I found out many years later that particular model, special model's name was actually Inge. She had blonde, blue eyes, and she was made for the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. And the model's name was Inge. Would you believe it? I found that out many years later.
The doll, and it made its way back to you. You lost it during the war, and it made its way.
No, I didn't lose it. She was with me all the time. That's one thing. And so when we were transported, they looked at, you know, open everything in that school gymnasium. And I had a little Dutch pin. And the guard said, rip that off me. You won't need this way. You're going to post this net with do English in Swabian dialect. I don't know where I'm going. I'm 7 years old. And probably he gave it to his niece, daughter, whatever. I always wondered who got it. And then he saw my doll. He ripped her from me. And you could look inside her hollow body, and I wasn't carrying anything. Somehow I made a fuss. He gave me back the doll, which I brought to America. That's how I arrived with the doll in my arms. Today she's in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., but they are not showing her at this point. She's a little brittle. Well, we're both old ladies by now. She's 2 years younger than I am. But anyway, but she's still intact. She has a few little breaks here and there. But anyway, From there, we were sent to Stuttgart to be a part of, to combine with all the little towns and so forth, all the other people for the transport. And we were sent to a special gathering place in Stuttgart, 2 huge halls that were used for flower shows at one time. And from there, we were transported to Terezin. But there were no tracks, no train to go directly into the camp. There was a little town just before it called Bohusewitz. And the trip took about 2 days. I was the youngest of that group. And I remember I was sick to my stomach. Whenever I got nervous, it was terrible for the people because we could not leave the train. Only the food that we had, very little water. And the SS, the stormtroopers, were riding with us. I remember it very well in crowded conditions. It was actually a real train still, not a boxcar. So we arrive in Bohusewitz and drop everything except your metal dishes and your little duffel bag and a blanket. March, and it was about close to 2 miles, a little over 2 kilometers to march. We had many old people on that transport, and we arrived in Terezin or Theresienstadt, which was actually a fortress town where they put the intelligentsia of Europe, old people, highly decorated war veterans.
Musicians, artists.
Well, not only that, I mean, other people too. Older people, because they said it's an old age place. Yeah, well, it wasn't. And the first ones there were, they came in 41, we came in 42 in August, were the Czechs, then the Germans and Austrians. Also Dutch came, mainly from Westerbork, internment camp 2 in Holland. That's actually where Anne Frank died, in Westerbork. Right. No, she died in Bergen-Belsen.
She died in Bergen-Belsen.
Yes, but she was sent, I think, to Westerbork at one time too, and then to Auschwitz. But anyway, it was
at the time,
a place, a holding area, like you hold cows or animals before the slaughter. Yeah. We had about 140,000 people there. 2/3 would be shipped to the killing centers, mainly Auschwitz. It didn't matter whether you were a disabled war veteran or not. It didn't matter. They made up the list. That's it. You go. Eichmann, who was in charge of the whole deportation of the Jews, was there a few times, and I did see him there. So he came a few times to Terezin, and every time he came, there were transports out. But a lot of people died there. So 2/3 about were shipped out. Close to 1/3 died there of malnutrition. And at the end, we had a huge epidemic of typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Those were the disease constantly. So when we arrived, they put us in one of those big fortresses under the roof. It was very hot. It was August. And we were lying on the floor, on cement floor. And I remember seeing some people, they had white sheets over them. And I looked underneath one of them, dead bodies. I remember one person from our transport, an older man, he wanted to jump out the window. There was some little dormer window, small. And my father saw him almost half out already. He said, look, don't do that. We're going to get out of this. My father was always the one with optimism. But the following day,
you've got his optimism.
Excuse me?
You've got his optimism.
Yeah, well, he died. He leaped the following day. Mm. So this went on for a while, and then there was a Czech woman who found us lying there. We never knew her, and she said, "Is there a child in the transport?" We said, "Yes, one, me." So she took me to a children's room. There were double and triple deck bunk beds there. And she gave me a little piece of her son's mattress. And I was on the floor, and a lot of children in that room had a scarlet fever. And within a few weeks, I had it too. And I ended up in the so-called hospital, 2 children in every bed. My partner was a little girl from Luxembourg, and the bed was almost always wet, and we could not see our parents. And I was covered with lice, and I had measles, mumps, everything, one after the other, and very little care. We had nurses and doctors, but they couldn't help us. No medicine, very little medicine. Then I joined my parents. They were in what was called the disabled war veterans section, 50 people in the room. And we were allowed to live as a family, but extremely crowded, double, triple deck bunk beds. Eventually we were in a tiny, tiny room, just the beds with a family from Berlin. And they had a daughter, exactly my age. Her birthday was in October, mine in December. And her father was also disabled war veteran, but he was half Jewish. And the mother was she was brought up as a devout Christian, which didn't help. And about 2 years ago or so, she went to Auschwitz, by the way. There was a big selection at the end after the International Red Cross inspection, which you probably will want to hear about.
That's what I was about to say, for the benefit of the people who aren't as au fait with this. Theresienstadt or Terezin was considered a model.
Well, it was only a model in the sense that they showed it.
Yes.
This is a wrong conception, only because they showed it to the International Red Cross.
That's what I was trying to. That's what I was trying to say to people. They created this myth that here we have this model camp, and they did up the camp just long enough for the Red Cross to arrive.
Yes, they made a game out of it, and like a theatrical productions. And I was there. In fact, I have a friend here who was one of the people who had to say they gave them some sardine sandwiches. They did not take all the children, all the adults either to show. In fact, they took a few thousand people out of the camp to make it look less crowded, to send them to Auschwitz. By the way, we never knew about Auschwitz. They kept it a secret. They kept it a secret. And it was a hybrid camp, a ghetto, part ghetto, and concentration camp. It definitely was a concentration camp.
But how could it beggars belief that the Red Cross could allow themselves to be
it was a place
the way they were.
Well, first of all, you had all these famous people there. And they gave permission. They asked for permission, and probably even the Danes had something to do with that, because some of the Danish Jews were sent to us. And the Danish kings, they came later, told them, you don't touch my Jews. And as far as I know, the ones who was transported to our camp, none were sent to Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the main killing centers for our camp too. Some were sent other places, Mali Trostinets and other places, but many people died. Over maybe 33,000 people died there. We had a huge crematory.
Peter Gins was only 13 when he was in Terezin, and then he was sent to Auschwitz.
Of course, most of the children were sent. All the children, in the compound where I was, there were children, and their fathers were heroes. One had an arm missing, a leg missing. They were war heroes. It didn't matter. In fact, my father and my girlfriend's father were selected at the same time, because her name was Abraham and ours is Auerbacher, A, you see the letters. And he had to go to a separate section, and they did not make it, even though the father was half Jewish and wounded in World War I. It didn't matter. So it was, I don't know why I'm alive today, to be honest. It was good luck, to say. I think most survivors will say it was just pure luck.
Well, given your life since, Inge, given your life since the end of the war,
Well,
I'm
okay,
not,
so
I'm
I
not
can tell
surprised
you,
that you survived, because you have lived
well,
a remarkable life.
we survived. Well, it was just pure luck. Of course, in the section where I was, there was one girl, also daughter of a war veteran, and she got a little bit more food, a little watered down milk, maybe an extra piece of bread. I would like to tell you a little bit about the condition, which is very important before we get to the end. 3 times a day, you had to stand in line. In the morning, it was some black liquid they call coffee. It was good for cleaning whatever clothes you had. All the time, standing on line. You got a bread ration once a week, very little bread, and it was not made of good flour. There were all kinds of things in it. I mean, food got so scarce that we even ate dandelion leaves. That's how hungry we were. There was nothing. I had and then at lunch, maybe a little portion of turnip and soup, some murky looking soup. And at night, the same thing. So hunger was constantly with us. In fact, I had a little bed for my doll at the head of my bunk bed, top bunk bed, and a dirty carton, filthy. And one morning I look into it and I see this gray thing in there. What was it? A starved mouse. Not even a mouse could find enough food. Now, getting back to the girl, and they told us, don't go near her. She has a terrible disease and you'll catch it. But what did we care? I prayed to God at that time. I want to have what she has. And what was it? It was tuberculosis. And so when I came here, it was a terrible thing. But I would like to tell you a little bit about, well, what did we children do? We rummaged around in the garbage dump, finding some potato peelings. The most important thing was a potato. I even wrote in my book, I'm a Star, which is now in 8 languages, diamonds on the snow. The diamonds were potatoes. They were as good and valuable as potatoes. We rummaged in this garbage dump. I mean, we couldn't do any work. Some of the teenagers did do some work. And the older people, like the women, they worked in a mica factory, a barracks set up for that. And yes, I do remember the International Red Cross inspection. I think we talked a little bit about that. We were not allowed to go near it, but I remember they built some children's gazebo there, a music pavilion. I remember it very well. Music was playing. They had a little children's opera called Brundibar, which they performed for this high commission. They only were there, I think, a day or so, maximum 2 days.
It was all just a whitewash.
Absolutely, to show,
create this, and then. From what my research, they took the food out of the children's mouths the minute the Red Cross left.
Oh yeah, they gave them some sardine sandwiches. I have a friend who was told, Uncle Ram was our camp, the SS commandant.
Yeah.
And they were told to say, Uncle Ram, schon wieder sardine. We have sardines again today. We don't want them. They ate them down so quickly that they had to replenish. And, I really wanted to be, they made a film at that time, and I always wanted to be a movie star. So I think little girls do. And my mother and my father, you don't go near there. You never volunteer for anything, nothing. You stay incognito, period. So finally, after that, it was 1944 in August when July, I think it was, when the International Red Cross came. And almost the whole camp afterwards was sent to Auschwitz. Almost everybody went. There was almost nobody left. We had 15,000 children, and almost all of them were sent to Auschwitz and never came back. But the worst day that I remember was on November 11th, 1943. They said a count out had to be taken, and they knew exactly how many people were there, and they herded us into this ravine surrounded by the SS having guns in their hands. They didn't shoot. We were standing there in the mud, raining. It was the worst day that I can remember. And probably the plans were either to kill us that day or send us all en masse to Auschwitz. They were beating us and counting. They knew exactly how many people were there. And after dark, they finally let us go back. And it was a horrible day, the worst I can think. My mother also gave up already. We had no food, no bathroom, nothing. Of course, we had only latrines. You know, there was no privacy, and maybe twice a year to get a shower with permission. Women went with the children, and the men, you know, took, I guess, the boys.
When you look back on it, Inge, what do you think it was that helped you to survive? Was it fate?
You know, it was
luck, determination?
Also, it was because I was able to stay with my parents. That was always the fear. I was separated from them from around September till December when I was in the hospital. We were not allowed to see our parents.
Because you got tuberculosis.
Yeah, well, that came later. Yeah, well, I got it there. But maybe you want to hear about liberation.
Yeah.
Liberation came on May 8th, 1945. And there were pieces of paper.
By the way, there's no hurry with you. If whatever you want to tell me, you can tell me.
I will. I think that's really important because we just had the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camps, and probably our camp was one of the extremely last camps, because Auschwitz was already liberated by the Russians in January 27th. We were in great danger still by the time May came around, because they were planning also the gas chambers. They were never completed, never. But they were in the planning stages, and had the Allies not come at that time, I wouldn't be here. So I remember I heard a lot of noise, the trucks were moving out, and I climbed one of the barricades. There was a big fence near where I lived at that time, and all of a sudden there was a huge noise, and also they were burning some papers too, some of the records. And all of a sudden there's an explosion. I thought my head had flown off. And they were throwing in hand grenades at that time, hand grenades. And went to my parents, my father said, look, I was in the war, World War I, and I know they're trying to kill us now. So we went in this dark hole and stayed there. I took only one thing with me, a prayer book my father found in the garbage. It belonged to somebody from Nuremberg, and he threw it in the garbage. It's a prayer book that a soldier would have, a small one. Maybe he didn't believe in God anymore. He didn't want to take it. Or maybe he was scared to take it. Never prayed so hard in my life as on that day. And we have a prayer like you have, Christian have, like the Our Father. The most important prayer for us is the Shema Yisrael, meaning God is one is God. And I'll sing it for you. Most of our prayers are sung. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. God is one is God. I didn't take my doll in the cellar, and then was dark. One person had a tiny little candle, and somehow somebody went up. He was brave, and then he said, "We are liberated. The Russians are here." We couldn't believe it. Absolutely.
They're the Russians that actually, two of the Russians that actually liberated the camp.
Yes, the Russian soldiers.
Yeah.
Yes, and I wanted, and one soldier over the fence gave me a big piece of black bread, Russian bread, with a heap of butter on it. That was the first real good food I had in 3 years. 3 years. And they came in with their tanks, and they were rowdy. They were sitting on the tanks and playing harmonicas and accordions mainly, and singing. And it was a wild place. But just before that, they had the death marches coming in from the other camps, because they had wanted to kill every single Jew who was still alive. So they came from Riga, they came from Buchenwald in terrible condition. And they told us also that, that people were being killed in gas chambers. We couldn't believe it, They kept it from us. We knew going to the east would be horrible, maybe even worse. Look, every place was terrible. People died in every camp.
Yeah.
Of course, Auschwitz was a death factory. And eventually they would have, built the gas chambers in Terezin as well. And there was a big typhus epidemic. So I know about epidemics. Almost the whole camp had it. Thank God I didn't. And it was on quarantine. Even the New York Times wrote about it. And we had to stay put. And until a bus came, it was maybe 2-3 months later from Stuttgart. In fact, it's now 75 years later. And one reporter just wrote a whole big article, front page article in the Stuttgarter Zeitung, the main newspaper in Stuttgart. They sent it to me because I'm the only one still alive from that transport. Yeah. And out of those close to 1,200, very few survived, very, very few. And then we went back, and we were like in the displaced persons camp. It was like a building in the beginning, like a former Hitler Youth building.
Yeah.
We stayed there maybe a week. And the first good food I had, I remember, there were tables set with white tablecloth, and we had chicken soup. I had not tasted that in over 3 years. Nothing. So we made our way back to my mother's hometown, even still clinging on to the hope that my grandmother would be standing at the door. Of course she wasn't. And on the way back, we asked for my grandmother's maid, who was a very good friend. She came in the middle of the night to save our prayer books, to save a few, 2 photo albums. That's why I have pictures that you see there.
Yeah.
And some religious things. And the person said, Teresa is not alive anymore. How could it be? She was young, healthy. Well, when the Americans came to that part of Germany, they knocked on the door. They thought, this is a little village. And she didn't speak English. They thought, everybody had a gun or wanted to hurt them. And she didn't open the door right away. And they shot through the door, killed her instantly. And I say, if there's a heaven, there's a Jewish woman and a Christian woman walking hand in hand, one killed by a Nazi bullet, the other the product of war. And I'm still friends, even with her great-grandchildren.
But you had a very good, your best friend was Christian.
Yes. And the 2 heroes of my life was this Teresa, with the name, of course, and the German woman who gave me her lunch on the train. Those were my heroes. And then
small little gestures, that meant so much.
That's right. And so, there were good people among these people, but very few, unfortunately, because they did go with Hitler. Most of them did, Of course, we went to the bigger city, we got an apartment, stayed there about 9 months. I had to start school. I didn't know where I belonged. 5th grade, 4th grade, I had no clue, because I had 6 months of schooling, but I could read, write, and do a little bit of math, believe it or not, in the Jewish school. And so we had the opportunity to come to America because President Truman opened the doors to us legally. And we were on the second boat that came here. It was a troop transport boat, very rickety, and took 10 days. It was a stormy voyage, very stormy. And my mother had a brother in America, in New York, and my aunt picked us up, and we stayed in their home for a few weeks, and I was put in with some distant family. They had 2 children because they wanted me to start school. It was May. In May, I came to America, and school was almost over, and I started to learn English. And then my parents got a job as a maid. My mother became a maid, and my father a butler in a very rich home. And I got a terrible cold, which I had gotten, by the way. We were in cattle cars transported from Stuttgart to Bremen and Bremerhaven. It didn't matter. We had a few.
Sorry, Inge, your voice is gone.
Excuse me?
Can you repeat that there again? The internet went unstable for a second. Can you reach?
Yes. Where did it go unstable?
You said that you had the cold from the
Yes, it was cold inside. We were dangling our feet outside, and on the cattle car they put with chalk, "God bless President Truman." He was the president at that time because Roosevelt had died, and Truman became the president.
Roosevelt hadn't been very welcoming.
Well, I mean, I was 10 years old by that time. I had my doll in my arm. I remember exactly what I wore that day. A blue hat that was made for me with some polka dots on it, and a colorful blue dress made specially for me because I had no other clothes. Only what I got after the war. Some some seamstress made some clothes for me. We had a fairly good life after the war in Germany, but my parents wanted to leave. They wanted me to have a better life. So we landed up, my parents, with this a villa, a big house. And the lady said, "I have to take your daughter to the doctor. She has a really bad cold." So she took me to the doctor, and I was I felt pretty good after the war, but obviously I got the disease in the camp. But somehow there was a little time when I felt better, but it came in full force. So I was sent to a public hospital because my parents didn't have any money. It was a children's infectious disease hospital in Westchester, where we were living at that time, outside of New York City. They had 2 wards. One with polio, was rampant still at that time.
Yeah.
The children were up to 15 years of age, and we were upstairs, TB. Also rampant still. And I was there in bed on complete bed rest for 2 years. 2 years. And then I finally got an apartment in Brooklyn, different. And then they fired them when they wanted them to come to stay and work on Sunday, this couple. And incidentally, they were Jewish, and they were not very helpful. And at that time, we did not get very much help from anybody. I was in a public hospital on the wards, and Jewish people don't eat pork. And and that's, sometimes they serve that, and I told my mother, I can't eat that, we're not supposed to.
You still eat?
Well, yes, I observe as good as I can the dietary laws, yes. So my mother said to me, "Look, you have to eat whatever comes, you want to get better." So unfortunately, I had to eat that. And so every, once a week, my parents could come to see me, but then they got fired because the couple, she wanted my mother to be there for Sundays because she showed movies there in the big house, and it was a mansion, movies in the garden, and so they fired them. So my mother said, "Look, I intend to see my daughter." Then finally, after 2 years, my parents got an apartment in Brooklyn. Everybody knows Brooklyn, even in Ireland. And we have plenty of wonderful Irish people in New York. You know that.
They're coming out of the cracks walls in Brooklyn.
Yes.
The Irish are coming out of the cracks in the walls.
Everybody is Irish on St. Paddy's Day. I too. I wear a green sweater, and I save it for that day. But anyway, So we had a third floor walk up and a cold water flat heated our room, our apartment, small apartment, with kerosene. And also it was, I was not allowed to go to school yet. I had to have home instruction for another year because I was not well yet for a whole year. But the teacher whom they sent, she was an old lady. She couldn't walk the 3 flights of stairs, no elevator, of course. And so I got some books from the Department of Education. And that is really around the time in the hospital and when I was teaching myself, I started to write. I wasn't able to go to school. I had no friends. And I had to keep busy somehow, but I taught myself. I started to write little poems and things. After a year, I started high school. For the first time in my life, I really went to school, to Bushwick High School in Brooklyn, which I finished in 3 years instead of 4, going to summer school. And for the first time again, I was part of the groups. I wanted to be in the science group, in the science club, the dance club, whatever there was, I joined. I was so happy finally to be, to be part of one of the editors of the newspaper and the science club. I did my experiments, and that's where my love of science came. I had a wonderful science teacher, and I never had anything about science. It was, I knew that flowers need sunshine. That's what they did in the hospital. I mean, we had no real lessons there. There were some teachers came around, but most of us were so sick that we had almost nothing. But one experiment I remember, they put a flower pot in the sun and one in a closet. And of course, the one in the sun lived and the other one died. So that was my introduction to science. And I did very well in high school. My first test, I got an A. So I said, I like that. Yeah. And so that was going to be my career. So then I started, and by the way, there was a drug that came out, streptomycin, when I was home. And I got extremely ill at that time, hemorrhaging. I was near death. I had no energy left when I was home for the year. And they said, well, there's a new experimental drug, and they gave that to me, streptomycin, the first drug against tuberculosis, an absolute miracle drug. And I found actually the co-discoverer, years later.
And that's the photo.
That's when I was in the hospital.
In the hospital with Dr. Schatz.
No, it wasn't there yet. People didn't. There was no cure at that. When I was home a
Dr.
year.
Schatz, isn't it, with you?
No, that's my mother.
Is it?
That's my mom. She's wearing a hat. And they had to wear gowns to go, not to bring us any more diseases. So everybody came in there because we were infectious disease and they didn't want us to get any more. And maybe also to shield them for anything,
When I was looking at the photo after you sent it to me, I thought you're very alike.
I have a picture of Dr. Schatz. If you need it, I can give it to you.
No, you're very alike. I was thinking, and it's I thought when you had mentioned Dr. Schatz in the note.
But that was years later when I found him.
And I thought that was.
But streptomycin was given to me after a few months at home because I really, really got sick. And that really, I got better, thank God. Still no school, obviously, but the year after the hospital, still no school. I had to rest a lot, and I got extremely ill at that time. I mean, near death, I will say that, near death. I even wrote a poem about death. And then I started school, and I told you at 15. And then I wanted to be a doctor because medicine was always, doctors always around me. And I started Queens College of the City University of New York. And they wanted, of course, they examined you, and I really didn't want them to know that I had that disease. Maybe they'll kick me out. But they wanted more tests, and my test came out positive. And they kicked me out of school. And again, 1 whole year in bed. Again, the year that I tried to save was lost in that year. And new drugs came out at that time, PAS and INH, 2 new TB drugs. I had to take 26 pills a day, plus 2 more streptomycin, 1 in the morning, 1 at night. It took a year until I was better. And I went back to college and was still a pre-med, majored in chemistry. I finished that the next 4 years. And I worked for many years afterwards, and in my field, in medical research and clinical work, altogether 38 years. But during my time of working, I wanted to go back and see if this must have been a bad dream. And I went back to my hometown, and I went back to Terezin too. The Russians were there at that time. It was in 1966 when I went back. And I saw, in the middle of the town, people were living there again, and there were children playing around. It was raining, and all this came back. Where are the children? Where are those 15,000 children? Where are they? And I am here. I have to do something. I don't want to be just in the laboratory. I went to the crematory. It was shown around, and I said, I made up my mind. I am healthy. I'm going to apply to medical school. Even though I'm 31 years old, I'm going to do it. I didn't try in America because women at that time and older, forget it. But I applied to Heidelberg University, which was at one time the best medical school, one of the best in the whole world.
Yeah.
And I got in, and I decided I am going to med school. I quit my job, and I got a room over there. I had my acceptance, but they wanted to see my papers, which I had sent in anyway, but another interview. And there was one lady in Stuttgart, actually a secretary, the main one wasn't there. Oh, Sie sind eine Vertriebene, you're a displaced person. Why did you come back? I said, oh my God. And then I went back to the village where I had a room. I rented a room, and it was May 1st. They have a big holiday over there. And they were singing on the street. I opened the window. Nazi songs in 1968. Nazi songs. I said, oh my God, oh my God. My mother told me, don't go back, please don't. I said,
it's amazing it's amazing, Inge, how many survivors did go back. Tommy Reichenthal here did his engineering degree in Germany. And I said to him, why, Tommy? And he said, because they were the best. I wanted to get a good engineering degree. And that's why I went back there.
I could get it. Well, I just went over there. Because I felt I had a chance, maybe. I mean, I had good marks. I had already worked. And then I gave it up. But I felt sorry about that. But I went back. I worked for so many years. But recently, with the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camps at the end of World War II, I was invited to come to Moscow and St. Petersburg.
That's where you met.
Yes, exactly. And they were doing Brundibar, and they wanted somebody who saw it. I mean, I was not in it. I don't speak Czech. And I went, and it was really hard to get a visa. Terrible, terrible. And I was invited also in Moscow. I spoke in Moscow, and be invited to the Victory Parade, which they have every year. The Russians lost a lot of people during World War II, millions. And Putin puts on a really big show. I saw him march by, and I had an invitation, and they have it on Red Square. Thousands of people are marching and marching. And I found out who was the liberator of Terezin, and they told me it was a general. They called it Marshal, the person of Ribalco. It was his unit, but I found that there were some others now. Ribalco, his unit liberated Terezin, and I said, I need to go to his grave. That was in my mind a long time. I want to, say thank you to that general who gave me a second chance in life. And I saw I was on Red Square, the pictures you see there.
Yeah.
With these were veterans of the wars, with the Russian veterans, and they were very nice to me. Thousands of people. You had to have a special permit to go there. And I had some new Russian friends who took me around. I met the chief rabbi there. And then they took me, I couldn't go home without it, to see Ribalgo's grave, which is huge. I believe I sent you pictures. I put flowers on his grave. And somebody from the Jewish community, the rabbi's secretary, sent somebody to say, usually men, if you're very Orthodox, men usually say prayers, in the open especially. And he said the prayers for me. And I was supposed to go this year again. Hope, even my wish was to meet Putin, not as a political statement, as a statement of peace. I even had written a new song, A World of Peace.
Inge, can you hold a second, Pat? Can you check the light there? Everything is kind of, if you don't mind. There's something going wrong with the light here. Everything is going blobby at the side. So
I hope you got my interview. Yeah.
Actually, turn it off, Pat. That's no, turn it back on. Oh yeah, your interview is perfect. Yep. No,
but anyway, I have a Facebook friend. We are, like you are. We have the same pandemic. It's getting a little better in New York, but one of my Facebook friends said, I want to make a mask for you. So what color do you want? I said, I want red, because I want to scare that bug off. And so she made me a red mask. And that was very kind. Yes.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. What was that taken at, Inge? Was that when you were presenting flowers at the grave?
Well, that was when I was in Moscow and St. Petersburg last year. And also, I went to see the grave of President Truman. I wanted to thank him as well. He was one of my heroes too. And we went to Missouri. I was speaking in the neighborhood there. So I said, please take me to the town where he has the museum in his name. I went to see the museum. I saw the graves and so forth. So I did my thing. I wanted to thank the most important people one of the most important people in my life who saved me. It was President Truman and the Russians.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, they were part of the Allies, of course. But the Russians did come.
I put this photograph in of you, Inge, because you have been much recognized.
Thank you.
Your background is just extraordinary. I mean, what you've done since World War II to try and promote peace in the world, it is just astonishing. You were made an honorary member of an Indian tribe, weren't you?
Yeah, the Blackfeet.
Yeah.
To me, it's the most wonderful award. These are very poor people in South Dakota, Blackfeet Nation. They gave me a new name, Little Star Woman, and they have a ceremony, which they do very rarely, a blanket ceremony. They put it around me, and then they say all kinds of prayers and the drums and all that stuff.
And I'll show these photographs later on.
Yeah. I have been you know, I've been working very hard. I mean, writing is really more of a hobby. It became a little bit more. I do speak all over the world, even as far as New Zealand, a wonderful country. I was in Australia. I was in Norway. I was all over the place.
And the photograph here is when you received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor.
Yes, and that's given not because you went through Ellis Island. It is an award of your heritage.
Yeah.
Now, my heritage is German. I didn't get it as a Holocaust survivor. I got it as a German American. And they were very famous people there. John Glenn got it. He didn't show up, but he got the award. Hillary Clinton, very famous people at the same time. I felt very honored, really. And yes, I'm a proud American now. I could get my German citizenship back, but right now, what for? They took it away when I was about 6 months old. And I'm an American now, period.
And you also received a Woman of the Year award.
Well, that was one of them. I received many, two of the highest awards from Germany, from the president and from the governor of the state of Baden-Württemberg. I have a lot of different awards, but that's okay. But I never married. And one of the reasons was I was rejected because...
I wondered that. Did you ever marry?
No, I was not married. One of the reasons also was the stigma that I had as the TB survivor, which is, I mean, I'm negative for what, 60 years now, over 60 years. I'm fine. I never had a recurrence.
And that held you back from getting married. My uncle had
yes, it did.
And he spent 6 months in a what they call the sanatorium here in Ireland. And
well,
he married.
Well, it depends. I mean, I guess I picked the wrong people, even doctors, and they were scared. Stigma is a tremendous stigma against this disease. And look, it was contagious. It was, you know. And in fact, I spoke at the World Health Organization. I have a film on the Schatz story. You know, the one who saved my life. I mean, a Nobel was given for this. The discovery was huge, but it was given to Professor Waxman, who was the chairman of the department at Rutgers, soil chemistry, and his student Albert Schatz really did most of the work, but he didn't get it.
Yeah,
and it was a shame. And I met him only through a newspaper article, A Dose of God, in one paper, a Jewish paper actually. And in the bottom it said, one paragraph, Albert Schatz, he believes in, spirituality and healing. Well, I was really not that interested in that, but I read it, 2 pages. On the second page, middle of the page, it said, Albert Schatz, co-discoverer of antibiotic streptomycin. I said, oh my God, I always wanted to thank Waxman for giving me my life. It was a huge discovery, one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And this young guy at age 23, he discovered it. They called him the co-discoverer. Fine. I mean, certainly it was in Waxman's laboratory. And I met him eventually. I wrote to the newspaper immediately. We met, and I heard the whole story about suing and God knows what. It's a terrific story. We have a film on it, documentary. I was always interested to have that made into a real Hollywood movie. Now, 2 directors saw it, the idea, but who knows? But I do have a film on it, and I would love to come to Ireland. Hey, invite me. I want to come there. I speak all over. And also maybe to speak in some medical schools and nursing schools. It's a great story about people who get cheated.
Inge, you have no idea. I'm saying here to myself, this interview could have gone on for at least 3-4 hours. Do you know? Because you're only touching the surface I
am kind of, yes.
Look,
I feel every life is a book.
Every life is a book. And look, Inge, every part of a life is a book. I mean, you could write a book alone on your science, on your
Well, I wrote 3
chemistry.
books on my life. I have 6 books so far, working on number 7,
but
which I can't tell you yet.
You wrote a book on streptomycin, didn't you?
I wrote with Dr. Schatz. I mean, he got sick, unfortunately, with pancreatic cancer, so I had to finish even before he didn't feel so good. I wrote a book about 2 black girls in sports, running against the wind. Look, we are all God's children. And I believe, I put this on the internet and they took it off. All lives matter, not one group above another. We are all God's children. That to me is very important. I live in Jamaica where, I lived for many years now in a row house. It's Queens, the borough of Queens, which is the most diverse place in the whole country. Our houses are attached. One side is a very devout Muslim family, the other Hindu family, and then a Christian house. 4 religions side by side, and we get along. And when we get to know other people, this hatred stops.
That's so true. You received, I don't actually know what the award was for, with the Indian couple that you're photographed.
No, the Indian couple are just my neighbors. Unfortunately, now passed away too, but the son lives next door. I'm part of that family. There's 6 children, 3 became doctors. Now, where in the world do you have such a case? America is still the dream world, the land of opportunities, and I don't know why people make such trouble right now. They should be grateful to be here, grateful, and thank God. You know, we are not a bad people here. We're all mixed up, every race, every religion. Yes, there are some problems, but once you get to know, if people don't try to get another people, I don't care if you're Hindu or Muslim, and you will see that we all want the same things. We're all scared of the pandemic. We all want food on the table. We want our families to stay healthy. That's all we want.
But Inge, you spoke at the United Nations, and it was a wonderful speech. I don't know if I'm able to actually put it up because they have they have the rights to it. Yeah. But they sent you the music that you wrote. I am a.
Well, I've been writing a lot of poems. Some of them have been set to music. It all started really in 1981 when we had a first meeting of International Holocaust, Jewish Holocaust Survivor in Jerusalem. And I wrote a special song for that, a poem actually, and I met somebody in the ladies' dressing room in the hospital where I worked for 30 years, 38 altogether. I worked, for instance, with the man in research. I did a lot of research too, who coined the word type A personality. Maybe you'll have that in Ireland too, type B. People who get heart attacks.
Here, but we hear it all the time from.
Well, I worked with the man who discovered, who wrote a book about that. I worked in his laboratory and other labs, and I worked with an Irish doctor too. 2 of them that was in medical school. One was Protestant, one was Irish. Dr. Fitzgerald was, of course, Catholic, and Dr. Marsh was Protestant, but they got along.
Absolutely.
So I worked with 2 of them in research in medical school, downstate med school. And so this song was the only original song written by a Catholic. She's Italian background, and she married proudly Anne O'Hara.
O'Hara.
So Comentucci O'Hara.
Comentucci O'Hara.
Yeah, Rosalie Comentucci O'Hara. And the song was We Shall Never Forget, and that's how I got into music. I had many poems, over 50 published, and that was the first song. Then I met other people.
She's a very emotional
choir. These children are from PS22, and they are quite world famous, a very poor school, and they have this choir, and everybody knows them.
Yes, 22.
I saw them on the Academy Awards they sang. What I loved about them was the diversity. They're black, they're white, they're yellow, they're every religion that you could think of, and race and so forth. And they all sing together, and it's just 10-year-olds. So I sent in this clip where they were singing one of my songs, Who Am I? And I wrote also a book with a Polish girlfriend who was in labor camps, and I wanted us, we're the same age in prison, that we should speak at the United Nations, and they didn't take us. I gave up. Meantime, she died, pancreatic cancer, terrible sickness. And then I had this clip where I spoke in that school, PS 22 in Staten Island, and somebody said, you know, they had terrible music the year before that for the international celebration or commemoration of the Holocaust, 27th of January at the United Nations. And he said, you know, so I said, let me send in this clip. And they loved it. And they said, we want you to, but you can only speak 5 minutes. I said, oh my God, 3 books in 5 minutes? And then they called again, 4 minutes. I said, I can't do that. But anyway, I got it together. I did speak a little over 5, about 7, because I can't read it just off. Everybody's time was scheduled. And they said that was the best speech, and they're using it all over now.
I heard it. It's an amazing speech.
And
I'm
they
not
invited,
sure I'll be able to put it up, but I'm putting at the start of this show, for anyone listening, this is the piece that we played at the start of the show. It was by PS 22, and they're a group of children from New York, and they sang Inge's song, and
but that was written by somebody else, by the way. That was written. She wrote the music. I don't write music.
Who was she? Because it froze there for a second.
She is in music. She's a songwriter.
And her name is?
Madeline Stone.
Madeline Stone. And she wrote
but the third, that's the whole story, but which I don't go into. I meet people on the radio. When I hear something I like, I get in touch with them, or through the internet. We do things together. Now, the new song that we wrote together, A World of Peace, was supposed to be the song for this year in different languages, you know, especially for Russia. I sent it to them to have it in Russian. And that was Madeline, and she got a person by the name of Alvin Love. He's African-American in Nashville. You know, Nashville is our music capital. And his mother is very famous gospel singer, the whole family, C.C. Winans, I think Winans it's called, and he's the son. His name is Love, believe it or not, the real name Love, Alvin Love. So he helped us a little with that too. So, and the song was sold to a very big company. You can get it on the internet, A World of Peace. So that's it. And I'm going on for more now.
Our closing piece of music today is another piece that you wrote that the PS 22 sang, and you actually spoke to the children.
Yes, I have two like that.
Could you explain for the listeners what that was about?
Well, I don't know which one you took, A World of Peace, or maybe both. They're both the same.
They're both the same piece of music, but could you explain to the listeners, I suppose, the story of how you were actually at the school?
How we were what?
At the school with the children. Well,
they sang, by the way, how I met them also at the Academy Awards a few years ago. They were the last act to go on, and they got a standing ovation. It was amazing. These are all very poor children. Unbelievable to go to Hollywood. It was amazing.
Oh, they are amazing children. And
yes, they are. And
the
choir master, Greg Breinberg, is amazing what he does with the children.
God, he's astonishing.
Yes, and this song was A World of Peace, and I do talk both of the clips that you have to the children, because they, you know, give them, I did an assembly for them, and I talked to the children. What does this all mean? What does this mean to them? and ask questions, and they were just wonderful kids, 10-year-olds. And probably you will want to close this. I have a little statement for the closing.
Please. I leave the last words to you, Inge.
Thank you. Well, you can be the last one too. My hope, my wish and prayer is for every child to grow up in peace without hunger and prejudice. I don't want any child to suffer again, any grown-up to suffer again. We have to live together. We're all God's children. And there is no such thing as this race, that race. We all belong to the human race. More important, that word, human. And I thank you so much for having me today. And I want to meet you in person. Hopefully this whole thing will blow away. It has to. And I can come to Ireland and meet you in person and meet many of the listeners too.
I hope that will happen too, Inge, because we've known each other for so long now.
I know.
And it's been almost like pen friends, except that we've been able to see.
We haven't met in person.
And this is actually our second time speaking on face to face on
right,
on
exactly.
Zoom.
And thank you everybody for listening, and thank you, Mary. Blessings to everybody. And I'll think of you, especially Ireland. Hey, when I wear my green sweater, even my mother used to give me a cupcake at breakfast with green on it. Oh, we had to celebrate St. Paddy's Day. Everybody's Irish here in New York. Everybody on St. Paddy's Day.
The air is Irish on St. Patrick's Day.
Everybody's Irish, no matter what.
Well, Dr. Inge Auerbacher, author, survivor of the Holocaust, author, humanitarian, chemist, poet, writer. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Shalom.
Shalom, and thank you, Mary, and thank you, Ireland. Love you, love you.
Love you.
What does it say? What do you say? Go broke? What is the saying?
Sláinte. Sláinte. Cheers.
All right.
Or good day.
Love the green. Love the green.
Good day, Shiv Slán.
Take care. All the best. Shalom.
Shalom.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.